My name is Anita, and this is my dad Earl. And together, we have a story. It's a story about grief and loss, and about art and adventure. But most importantly, it's about love. And it's why I'll see you on the mountain. I'm a printmaker, and for those who don't know, printmaking is an umbrella term for a variety of ways of transferring images onto paper. It can include etching, screen printing, monoprinting, relief printing, and lithography. But it's also my life passion. Printmaking allows me to take an experience such as having an injured butterfly land in my shirt while out jogging, and the different spiritual things I learned from that, and have it transformed from a carved woodblock into a final printed image, which in itself feels like an act of nature. And that's important to me because nature has always been a part of my identity. Growing up in rural Northwest Ohio, I sought connections between my inner world and the natural world. Connections between the spiritual and the natural. It was also part of my escape. The rural countryside was perfect for long hours of jogging and cycling, out into the distance. It was something I also inherited from my father. My relationship with my father was shaped around his illnesses. What began with complications with smoking and obesity would soon turn into a lifetime full of diabetes, heart disease, and cancer. And while my dad wasn't able to do the things other dads are able to do, I think it led him to have a different role in the lives of my brothers and I. For me, it was the role of the ultimate supporter. My dad wanted his kids to have a passion for art and music, and so he would take me and my brothers to all different kinds of concerts and festivals. We get to meet all his different music friends, and I have many fond memories of traveling with my dad. And one day we'd be in our own concert, and he would get to come and see us perform. And I think as much as my father would have loved for me to become a musician, my passion and my soul was always with art. The thing I remember most was actually cross-country races. I was never very fast and definitely not a top runner, but my dad would have somebody help walk him around to different parts of the course to take nice pictures like this. And at the end, I wasn't just running for my dad, I was literally running into his arms. Fast forward a few years, one of my prints got into a juried show at the Toledo Museum of Art. It was a wonderful accomplishment, but for me, it was special because it felt like one of those races all over again. My dad was so proud, and he was so happy to have his daughter's work hanging in the same building as some of his favorite Impressionist painters. It was a wonderful night, but it was also bittersweet, because at this point my dad had developed a diabetic abscess on his foot. Looking back, I believe that this infection would later lead to the collapse of his body. I got the call early one morning in September that my parents had decided it was time to put Dad into hospice care. What felt like a lifetime of struggling with disease collapsed into a week. My brothers and my mom and I spent the time with him as best we could, and the hospice staff, including the therapy dog Juno, was very sweet and helpful and caring. It was a sacred time, but it was also a painful and confusing time. In 20 years, my dad and I had traded places. First, him holding me at the beginning of my life, and then I holding him at the end of his life. He would pass away on the morning of September 13th, 2014. He was 61 years old. I was left with a lot of questions after my dad's death. Our family motto is to have a heart without fear, and I do believe that love redeems us. But where do we look after somebody is gone? What pieces are left behind? My answer would come in a small Celestial Seasonings tea box full of Kodak slides. My mom and I found the box after looking through my dad's things. We didn't have a projector at the time, so we sent them to a company that could turn them into pictures for us. What we saw were amazing. Mountains. Beautiful landscapes. Stunning images and rivers. Things I have never seen before in my life. And I recognized my grandparents. But it wasn't until this image had hit me. These pictures were things that my dad had seen. He had taken these photos and he was there in person. Now, I did know that during the 1970s and 80s, he lived as a volunteer firefighter in Colorado. I know this because he would tell wonderful stories about his experiences. One of my favorites is when a timber wolf scared him up a tree and he cut his hand. I remembered him telling me how the only way to clean it out was to dunk his hand into a hot spring, and how the pus would pour out into the water. But I had never seen any images of his travels, and I never really knew much more about his journey than what he told me. I didn't know how beautiful it could be, or how wonderful, or how majestic. It seemed unreal. To cope, I made a large-scale screen print from the images. I wanted to explore how the mountains were seen remained unchanged, but the person in the photograph lived his journey and passed on. It was still hard for me to understand. How could this person turn into the person I knew as Dad, who, loving and tender, still had a hard time walking just from the house to the car, was also a man who once climbed mountains. It was really hard for me to believe, and I knew I had to see them in person. I applied for the Stuart R. Gibbons Memorial Fellowship Grant, which is an experience-based grant. I told them how I wanted to drive to Colorado to retrace my father's footsteps. I would be hiking in the same places that he was, and I would be working in a nearby studio to produce my prints about my experiences. I told them about all the supplies I would need, including some wilderness gear. I even told them how I found a company that can turn urns out of fallen aspen trees from the Rocky Mountains. But most importantly, I told them that I needed to find out this other part of my father. This other part that I never knew and never saw for myself. I needed to experience it for myself. It was an ambitious project, but they heard me, and I got the grant. I would be going to Colorado. Gordon once wrote that some people think that the journey to becoming a spiritual being is like going up a mountain, and as we surpass all of our pain and our suffering, we'll reach a gleaming point at the top. But the reality, she suggests, is that we should go down into our suffering, down into our fears and our uncertainties. And as we work to understand ourselves, we'll find at the bottom of everlasting and healing love. I don't know what I will find in Colorado, but I do know that my Father's Spirit will walk with me every step of the way. and that this is my journey too. Death is a difficult thing to talk about, but I think death is just a part of life as ever. I'll see you there, Dad.